most famous crime in human history was not committed in the dark, as many are accustomed to believing. It was prepared in the bright light of day, to the scratching of Roman bureaucratic pens, the clinking of temple coins, and the clang of iron armor. We are used to seeing this story as a religious icon: betrayal, trial, cross, resurrection. But if we peel away the layer of mysticism and look at the dry facts, the most complex, convoluted, and cynical criminal case of the last 2,000 years opens up before us. A case in which the victim was doomed long before the arrest. Greetings. We are commencing an unprecedented investigation. Our goal is not theology. Our goal is forensics. To understand who really killed Jesus of Nazareth, we will not be leafing through prayer books. We will use cold logic and a powerful data analysis tool. We have loaded thousands of pages of historical chronicles, texts by Josephus Flavius, Tacitus, gospel testimonies, codes of Roman law, and archaeological reports into the analytical system Logos 7. This neural network is capable of establishing correlations invisible to the human eye and modeling the social processes of the past with frightening accuracy. And the first conclusion drawn by Logos 7 is shocking in its categorical nature. According to probability calculations, by the year 30 AD, the geopolitical configuration in Judea was such that the emergence and subsequent elimination of a figure like Jesus was a statistical inevitability. This was not an accident. It was a systemic glitch that the power structure had to rectify. Welcome to the first chapter of our investigation. Context: the powder keg. To understand the motive for the murder, one must first examine the scene of the crime. And I'm not talking about Golgotha. I'm talking about all of first century Judea. Forget the pastoral images of kind shepherds. Logos 7, having reconstructed the socio-economic landscape of that time, paints a very different picture. Judea in the 30s is an ecological and political disaster zone. It is a powder keg with a fuse already smoking. Let's look at the maps generated by our system. Judea is a tiny but strategically important province in the backyard of the Roman Empire. For Rome, this is not a jewel in the crown, but a headache. It is a buffer zone between the empire and the dangerous Parthian Empire to the east. The Romans need neither culture nor religion here. They need only two things: taxes and silence, stable transit of goods, and no rebellions. But there was no silence. We loaded data on the tax burden into Logos 7. The analysis results show that the average resident of Judea gave away 40 to 50% of their income. It was a double stranglehold. On one side, the Roman tribute, land tax, poll tax, customs duties at every bridge and intersection. On the other side, the temple tithe. Every Jew was obliged to pay a tax to the temple, which essentially functioned as a national bank and Ministry of Finance rolled into one. System Logos 7 conducted a correlation analysis of the standard of living and social tension. The conclusion is unambiguous. By the time Jesus began his preaching, 90% of the population was below the poverty line, even by ancient standards. People lost lands for debts. Families fell apart, selling children into slavery. The level of radicalization in society was off the charts. It was an environment perfectly suited for an explosion. Expectation hung in the air. But what exactly were they waiting for? They were waiting for a Messiah. But here lies a key error in modern perception, identified by our system during linguistic analysis of texts from that period. The word Messiah, or in Greek, Christ, in the first century, did not have the peaceful, spiritual connotation we are used to today. In the ears of a first century Jew, this word sounded like the hiss of a sword being drawn from its scabbard. The Messiah was supposed to be a warrior king, a new David who would physically destroy the Roman legions, drive out the occupiers, and restore the greatness of Israel. Logos 7 analyzed the profiles of so-called prophets and rebel leaders for 50 years before and after Jesus. Judas the Galilean, Theudas, the Egyptian. History remembers dozens of names. They all operated according to one script: gather a crowd, announce a coming miracle, sometimes take up arms, and inevitably be destroyed by the Roman military machine. The Romans developed a clear algorithm for reacting to such threats: a swift cavalry attack, execution of the leader, dispersal of the crowd. For a Roman procurator, anyone who gathered more than 50 people around themselves in the desert was automatically flagged as a terrorist and rebel. And into this boiling cauldron walks Jesus of Nazareth. But System Logos 7 notes a critical anomaly in his behavior that baffled both the Romans and the Jewish elite. He did not fit the standard rebel profile. He did not call for a tax boycott. When he was asked a direct provocative question about tribute to Caesar, he gave a brilliantly evasive answer, which our system evaluates as the highest level of political rhetoric. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. He did not arm his supporters. On the contrary, he spoke of loving one's enemies. For the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate, this was incomprehensible. The Roman bureaucratic apparatus, working on rigid instructions, did not know how to classify a threat that did not use violence. However, for another power in the region, for the Jerusalem temple aristocracy, Jesus represented a danger far more terrifying than any armed bandit. Let's break down the power structure in Jerusalem. The official version says that Jesus was hated for blasphemy. Logos 7 questions this version. Analysis of Sanhedrin protocols and historical realities shows, in first-century Judaism, there was a huge spectrum of opinions. Disputes between the schools of Hillel and Shammai were fierce, but no one was killed for them. Self-proclaimed prophets wandered the streets by the dozens. So why did this carpenter from Galilee become target number 1 for elimination? The answer is provided by the economic and political analysis conducted by Logos 7. The problem was not religion. The problem was the balance of power. The highest caste of priests, the Sadducees, controlled the temple. The temple was not just a place of prayer. It was a giant economic combine. During pilgrimage festivals, colossal cash flows passed through it. The sale of sacrificial animals, currency exchange. It was a business with incredible margins. The family of the high priest Annas, the father-in-law of the current high priest Caiaphas, had effectively privatized this market. The Talmud even preserves curses addressed to the bazaars of the sons of Annas for their greed and cruelty. And then Jesus appears, and he does something that System Logos 7 qualifies as a direct attack on the financial foundation of the elite, the expulsion of the merchants from the temple. This was not just an emotional outburst. It was a planned direct action. He hit them where it hurt most, the wallet. He publicly called their business a den of robbers. At that moment, his fate was sealed. This is no longer preaching. This is an attempt on a monopoly. But there is another, deeper layer that our analytical system has uncovered. It is the so-called Roman peace, Pax Romana. It was a peace bought at the price of total submission. High Priest Caiaphas was not just a religious leader. He was a Roman appointee. His vestments, the sacred clothes without which he could not perform rituals, were kept in the Roman fortress of Antonia and issued to him only on holidays against a receipt. Imagine the level of humiliation and control. Caiaphas understood. His power hung by a thread. Any disorder, any hint of losing control over the crowd, and the Roman governor would remove him and possibly march legions right into the Holy of Holies. Logos 7 modeled Caiaphas's decision-making logic. It is pure game theory. On one side of the scale, the life of one strange preacher from Galilee. On the other, the survival of the entire nation, the preservation of the temple, and of course, his own power and life. The Gospel of John attributes a phrase to Caiaphas. "It is better for us that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." The system's analysis confirms, from the point of view of cynical realpolitik, this was an absolutely rational, albeit monstrous decision. Caiaphas was not a religious fanatic in this matter. He was a crisis manager who decided to sacrifice a pawn to save the game. Now add the time factor. Events unfold on the eve of Pesach, the Jewish Passover. Jerusalem, a city with a population of about 50,000, swells to 150 or even 200,000 due to pilgrims. The streets are packed. Heat. The smell of sacrificial blood and sweat. Roman patrols everywhere. On the walls of the Antonia fortress looming over the Temple Mount, archers stand ready to shoot at any second. Everyone's nerves are on edge. Crowd simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that in such conditions, one spark is enough to start an uncontrollable uprising that ends in a massacre. Jesus rides into the city on a donkey, intentionally fulfilling an ancient prophecy about a king. The crowd shouts, "Hosanna," spreading their clothes. This is not just meeting a beloved teacher. This is a coronation. In the eyes of the Romans, this looks like a political demonstration. In the eyes of Caiaphas, this looks like the beginning of the end. System Logos 7 draws attention to an interesting fact. Jesus was popular. Incredibly popular among common people, especially Galileans, who were famous for their violent temper and hatred of Rome. To arrest him during the day, in public, was impossible. It would cause a riot, and a riot would cause a Roman punitive operation. The authorities needed to act surgically. They needed to remove him quietly, at night, isolate him from the crowd, quickly convict him, and present him to the people as a fait accompli, as a convicted criminal from whom everyone would turn away. Thus we see that by the time of the Last Supper, the trap had already snapped shut. Jesus found himself caught between two giant millstones. On one side, the Roman Empire with its paranoid fear of any leader capable of uniting the masses. On the other, the collaborationist elite of Jerusalem, panic-stricken at the thought of losing their privileges and provoking a war they could not win. But there was one nuance. Jesus was elusive. He did not spend the night in one place. In a huge, overcrowded city, finding one person without GPS trackers and surveillance cameras was an extremely difficult task for the temple guard. They needed inside information. They needed someone to lead them straight to the target in the dark, while the crowd slept. They needed an agent inside the inner circle. Logos 7 analyzes the structure of the group of 12 apostles. They were different people: fishermen, a former tax collector, and one man who stood out starkly from the mass, Judas Iscariot, the only one of the 12 who was not from Galilee, but from Judea, the only one involved with the group's finances. The traditional version says he betrayed the teacher for 30 pieces of silver. Greed, avarice. But our system, having analyzed the economic equivalents of that time, asserts 30 pieces of silver is the price of a slave. This is not an amount for which a man who walked with a prophet for 3 years risks eternal damnation in his life. It is too petty for such a grand betrayal. Something else lies here, something that escapes a superficial glance. Logos 7 suggests that Judas's motivation was much more complex and tragic. Perhaps it wasn't greed, but disappointment. Or maybe it was an attempt to push Jesus into action, to force him to finally reveal his divine power and strike at the enemies. So, the stage is set. The geopolitical analysis is complete. Judea is a powder keg. Jesus is the spark. Rome is the hammer. The priests are the anvil. all force vectors converged at one point in the spring of the year 33. The official version tries to convince us that this was a religious drama, but the data says otherwise. It was a political operation to eliminate a systemic anomaly. However, for the operation to succeed, the conspirators needed a key, a man who would open the door into the night. In the next chapter, we will load the psychological profile of the most mysterious participant in this drama into Logos 7. We will break down financial flows, analyze behavior, and try to answer the question, was Judas Iscariot just a greedy traitor? Or did he become a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't even understand? The system is ready to process data. File Iscariot is opening. But more on that in the next chapter. Do not switch off. The truth is much scarier than you think. In the history of forensics, there are names that have become household words. Brutus, Guy Fawkes, Benedict Arnold. But there is one name that stands apart. It has become synonymous with the blackest, vilest betrayal a human is capable of. Judas. For 2,000 years, humanity has cursed him, spit on his image, and considered him the embodiment of absolute evil. But if we remove emotions and turn on the cold logic of an investigator, we face a question that baffles any experienced detective. Where is the motive? We continue our investigation into the murder of Jesus of Nazareth. In the previous chapter, we established that Jesus became a political problem that needed to be solved. But to solve this problem, the Sanhedrin needed an executor inside the inner circle. They needed Judas Iscariot. The official prosecution version, enshrined in the Gospels and church tradition, is simple and clear. Judas loved money more than his teacher. He sold the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver. Case closed? Not quite. We loaded all available data on Judas, the financial system of first century Judea, and psychological profiles of revolutionaries of that era into the analytical system Logos 7. The system conducted a comprehensive behavioral and economic analysis. And here is the first conclusion that lights up on the monitor in red. The motive of greed does not withstand criticism. It is statistically untenable. Let's talk about money. 30 pieces of silver. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But what is this amount really? Logos 7 analyzed numismatic data. We are likely talking about Tyrian shekels, the only currency accepted in the temple due to its high content of pure silver. We converted the purchasing power of this sum at the rate of 30 AD. According to the laws of the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verse 32, 30 shekels is the compensation price for a killed slave. Not for a king, not for a prophet, not even for a free citizen. For a slave. In modern terms, this is an amount equivalent to the wages of an unskilled laborer for 3 to 4 months. This is not wealth. You cannot buy a villa in Caesarea or live comfortably until old age on this money. And we are expected to believe that the treasurer of the group, a man Jesus trusted with the box of donations, a man who saw, or at least believed he saw, the resurrection of the dead and the healing of lepers, would sell his soul and eternity for a few months of subsistence living. System Logos 7 evaluates the probability of such a motive as negligible, less than 3%. Something else lies here, something much more complex and terrible. To understand the motive, we need to build a suspect profile. Who is Judas? We asked Logos 7 to conduct a linguistic and geographical analysis of his nickname, Iscariot. Most of the apostles were Galileans. Peter, Andrew, James, John. They were all Jesus' countrymen, simple fishermen from the north. Galileans spoke with a distinct accent, were emotional, direct, and were considered hillbillies in Jerusalem. Judas was different. Ish-Carioth. Man from Carioth. Carioth is a town in the south of Judea. This means Judas was the only Judean among the 12 apostles, the only metropolitan, the only representative of the region where the center of power and religion was located. This creates a completely different dynamic within the group. The psychological module of Logos 7 points to inevitable feelings of alienation. He was a stranger among his own, more educated, more cynical, perhaps looking down on the simple fisherman. But there is a second version of the nickname's decoding, which our system considers extremely important for understanding the motive. The root of the word may trace back to the Latin sicarius. Sicari, or dagger men, were a radical wing of the Zealot movement. First-century terrorists who killed Romans and their collaborators in crowds with short, curved daggers. Psyche. If Judas was connected to this underground, or at least shared their ideology, then his presence near Jesus takes on a completely different meaning. Judas, like many at that time, was not looking for a moral teacher. He was looking for a leader. He was looking for someone with the power to throw off the Roman yoke. He saw Jesus calm the storm, feed thousands with a few loaves of bread. In the eyes of a politically motivated man, as Judas likely was, this is the ideal resource for war. Logistics problems for an army are solved. Provisions aren't needed. Medicine isn't needed. He will heal the wounded. Such a leader is invincible. Logos 7 models Judas's emotional state in the last week before the arrest. We see a classic curve of disappointment. The entry into Jerusalem was the peak. The crowd rejoices. It seems Jesus is about to give the signal, and the uprising will begin. But what happens next? Jesus doesn't go to storm the Antonia fortress. He goes to the temple, makes a scene, and then starts telling parables about his death. He talks about how a grain must die to bear fruit. He refuses power. For Judas's pragmatic mind, this is a catastrophe. 3 years of life wasted. The Messiah turned out to be a weak dreamer missing a historic chance. System Logos 7 offers a hypothesis that explains everything much more logically than simple greed. This is the theory of forcing the hand. What if Judas didn't want Jesus' death? What if, on the contrary, he wanted his victory? Imagine the thought process of a radical revolutionary. The teacher is too kind. He hesitates. He needs a push. If I put him in a hopeless situation, if I bring armed soldiers to him, he will have no choice. He will be forced to use his divine power. He will burn the enemies with heavenly fire, and then the kingdom of Israel will finally arrive. This explains why Judas took the money, not for enrichment, but to conclude an official contract, so the deal would go through, and the soldiers would definitely come. He initiated a crisis, counting on a miracle. He played Russian roulette with history. Let's analyze Judas's actions at the Last Supper through the prism of Logos 7's conclusions. The Gospels describe a tense dialogue. Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." Judas asks, "Is it I, Rabbi?" Jesus answers, "You have said it," and then adds a phrase that sounds like authorization for the operation. "What you do, do quickly." The system analyzes this dialogue and identifies a strange pattern. Jesus doesn't stop him. Peter, who had a sword with him, doesn't rush at Judas. No one blocks the door. Judas leaves into the night unhindered. Why? Because Jesus knew this is an inevitable part of the script, and Judas possibly perceived these words, "do quickly," as confirmation of his plan. As if the teacher said, "Go on, launch the mechanism, I am ready." Judas's tragedy was that they were speaking absolutely different languages. Judas spoke the language of war. Jesus spoke the language of sacrifice. Now let's move to the technical side of the betrayal. What exactly did the priests pay for? Logos 7 emphasizes, everyone knew Jesus in Jerusalem. There was no need to point a finger at him. Location? Also not a secret. He taught in the temple every day and slept on the Mount of Olives. So what was the value of Judas's information? The value lay in two factors: time and the absence of a crowd. The high priests needed a window of opportunity. They needed to know the exact place where Jesus would be away from his numerous supporters, in the dark, and where he could be taken quietly. The Garden of Gethsemane fit perfectly. It was a private, enclosed plot. Judas didn't sell Jesus' identity. He sold his seclusion. He sold the logistics of the arrest. Let's look at Judas's reaction after the arrest. This is a key moment for psychological profiling by system Logos 7. If he were just a cynical mercenary, he would have taken the money and vanished, dissolved into the crowd of pilgrims, moved to another city. But what does he do? Matthew writes that when Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, note, condemned, not acquitted or saved by a miracle as he might have expected, he repented. The Greek word used here implies not just regret, but a total shift of consciousness, horror at what was done. He runs to the chief priests. He tries to return the money. He screams, "I have betrayed innocent blood!" This is not the behavior of a man who made a successful deal. This is the behavior of a man whose plan collapsed, burying him under the rubble. The priests answer him with icy cynicism. What is that to us? See to it yourself. He is no longer needed, a disposable tool used and discarded. Judas throws the silver pieces in the temple. The ringing of coins on the stone floor is the sound of his life crashing. Then he goes and commits suicide. Logos 7 notes, suicide in Jewish tradition is a grievous sin. One resorts to it only in a state of extreme affect or absolute hopelessness. This is final proof that the motive was not profit. It was a tragic miscalculation. By the way, the fate of these 30 pieces of silver is also interesting. The priests, these guardians of the law, could not put them back into the temple treasury because it was the price of blood. Hypocrisy of the highest level. Paying for murder is allowed, but accepting the change is a sin. With this money, they buy a plot of land to bury strangers. Akeldama, the field of blood. Even after Judas's death, these coins continue to serve death. Analytical system Logos 7 makes an interim conclusion for the second chapter. Judas Iscariot is not just a villain from a children's fairy tale. He is a complex, broken man who became a victim of his own pride and political illusions. He became the ideal agent for the Sanhedrin precisely because his internal contradictions made him vulnerable to manipulation. The priest didn't even have to recruit him for long. He was looking for an outlet for his disappointment himself. So, Agent Iscariot performed his function. Information transferred. Mechanism launched. Now, brute force enters the game. In the next chapter, we will move from the smoke-filled offices of conspirators to the fresh air under ancient olive trees, to where the silence of the night is about to be shattered by the stomping of hundreds of feet and the clang of Roman weapons. We will analyze Operation Gethsemane. Why did arresting one unarmed preacher require a whole cohort? Was there resistance? And why does system Logos 7 classify what happened there not as an arrest, but as a military special operation with gross violations of regulations? Prepare yourselves. We are following the trail, and the night is getting darker. Silence. The viscous, tense silence of a night garden, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the heavy breathing of sleeping people. This is how artists usually depict this scene. But data loaded into the analytical system, Logos 7, paints a completely different acoustic and visual picture of that night. If we could direct microphones and thermal imagers there, we would see not a pastoral scene, but the start of a military special operation. We would hear not the rustle of leaves, but the rhythmic stomping of hundreds of sandals, the clang of iron, and the crackle of torches. Welcome to the third chapter of our investigation. We are at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Here, among ancient olives, an event occurred that forever changed the course of history. Tradition calls it an arrest, but system Logos 7, having analyzed the participants, their equipment and tactics, classifies it differently. This was not an arrest. This was a militarized raid. The capture of a particularly dangerous criminal using forces sufficient to suppress a small rebellion. Let's go straight to the numbers. This is what our system does best. How many people came for one unarmed carpenter? The evangelist John uses a very specific Greek term to describe the detachment that came with Judas, spera. Most translators shyly write detachment or soldiers, but Logos 7, referencing dictionaries of military terms of the Roman Empire of the 1st century, gives the exact meaning. Spera is a cohort, a Roman cohort. Standard strength, 600 legionnaires. Even if we assume the cohort was incomplete or it was only a part of it, a so-called maniple, we are still talking about 200 professional killers in heavy armor, plus the temple guard, a kind of religious police armed with clubs and swords, plus the servants of the high priests. Logos 7 models the situation. Against 11 sleepy Galileans and one teacher, an army numbering from 300 to 600 men was deployed. Why? This question lights up on our tactical monitor. Why such a colossal redundancy of force? The answer lies in fear. Analysis of the psychological profile of the operations organizers shows they were panic-stricken by two things. First, the crowd. They knew that not only the apostles could be in the garden, but hundreds of other followers sleeping under the open sky. Second, and this is most interesting, they were afraid of Jesus himself. Rumors of his miracles reached both Roman barracks and the high priest's chambers. The resurrection of Lazarus, which happened quite recently and nearby, scared the elite to death. What if he summons lightning? What if the earth opens up? Against magic, they deployed steel. A lot of steel. Logos 7 draws attention to another critical detail that completely changes our understanding of the political layout. The participation of a Roman cohort. The temple guard obeyed the high priest, but Roman legionnaires obeyed only the Roman procurator. Caiaphas couldn't just rent 600 of the emperor's soldiers. This means that the order for the arrest, or at least the sanction for the use of troops, was given personally by Pontius Pilate. This destroys the myth that Pilate found out about Jesus only in the morning at the trial. No. System Logos 7 builds a chain of communications. Priests came to Pilate in advance, outlined the threat of a riot, and requested military support. Pilate, as a pragmatic administrator, didn't risk regional stability before Passover and allocated troops. Operation Gethsemane was a joint action of the Roman state machine and Jewish religious authority. It was a state conspiracy. Now let's consider the location. The Garden of Gethsemane. The name Gat Shemanim means oil press. It was an enclosed farm with stone walls where oil was pressed. From a tactical point of view, the choice of location is ideal for capture, but terrible for defense. It is a trap. It is hard to escape the garden unnoticed, especially if the perimeter is cordoned off. Judas knew this place. The Gospel of John says, Judas knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. The traitor didn't lead them randomly. He led them by coordinates. Logos 7 reconstructs the route. The squad left the city, crossed the Kidron stream, and began to surround the foot of the mountain. Why were torches and lanterns needed? That night was a full moon. Pesach is always celebrated on a full moon. Visibility should have been good. The system suggests they intended to search for fugitives in bushes, caves, and grottos. They expected Jesus to hide. They judged him by themselves. But he didn't hide. He came out to meet them. Here, one of the strangest episodes of the arrest occurs. Judas gives a sign. A kiss. Why? If they have torches, if they know Jesus by face, he taught in the temple every day, why this theatrical gesture? Logos 7 proposes the version of professional identification. In the dark, in the chaos, it is very easy to confuse one bearded man in a tunic with another. James, for example, physically resembled Jesus. Later, they were often confused. Judas had to get close and mark the target so the soldiers would grab exactly the right one and not let the real leader escape in the commotion while they were tying up someone else. The kiss was not a gesture of love, but target designation, laser illumination of the target for the capture group. And then a glitch happens. Logos 7 records an anomaly in the soldiers' behavior. When Jesus comes out and says, "It is I," or more accurately, "I am," using the sacred formula of God's name, the crowd of armed men recoils and falls to the ground. What is this? Collective hypnosis? A shockwave of power? Or psychological shock? The system leans towards a combination of factors. Imagine the soldiers' tension. They are going to take a mage, a sorcerer, a dangerous rebel. They are on edge. And suddenly this man calmly walks out to them, doesn't run, doesn't scream, but authoritatively announces his presence. This pattern break, multiplied by superstitious fear, could trigger a physical retreat reaction. The front rows backed away. The rear ones pushed forward. A crush ensued. People started falling. But the confusion lasted seconds. Professionalism took over. The cohort began to close the ring. And at this moment, the apostles' nerves snap. Peter draws a sword. Logos 7 conducts ballistic analysis of the weapon. The Gospels use the word machaira. This could be a short Roman gladius, but where would a fisherman get one? Most likely it was a sika, a large curved knife, a zealot weapon, or simply a large utility knife for gutting fish. Peter was not a warrior. The system models the strike trajectory. He aimed for the head, wanted to kill. But the opponent dodged, and the blow hit the ear. The victim is Malchus, the high priest's servant. This isn't just a servant serving coffee. The slave of the high priest is a high status, a trusted person, possibly the commander of the temple guard detachment walking in the vanguard. Peter attacked a representative of authority in the line of duty. Under Roman laws, and Jewish ones too, this is instant death. Why weren't they all slaughtered right there? 70 people against 600? Any cohort commander would have given the order, "Destroy resistance." The apostles should have been lying dead in the olive grove. Logos 7 believes only Jesus' intervention saved them. His reaction was paradoxical. He didn't support Peter's attack. He stopped it. Put your sword back in its place. And according to Luke, healed the wounded man. This action completely broke the script of violence. The soldiers were ready for battle, but were not ready for mercy from the enemy. This moment of cognitive dissonance allowed the disciples to take advantage of the confusion and flee. And they ran, all of them. I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. The prophecy came true with mathematical precision. The system analyzes flight trajectories. In panic, people abandoned everything. The evangelist Mark describes a young man wrapped in a linen cloth over his naked body. When he was grabbed, he broke free, left the cloth in the soldier's hands, and ran away naked. Logos 7 identifies this strange, seemingly superfluous detail as an eyewitness signature. No one would invent such a shameful fact. Most likely it was Mark himself, or someone living nearby, who jumped out at the noise of the raid straight from bed. This adds documentary authenticity to the events. Chaos, panic, shame. So the target is captured. Jesus is bound, hands tied, possibly put in stocks. This is standard procedure for the particularly dangerous. The commander of the cohort, Chiliarch, commander of 1,000, confirming the officer's high rank and the operation's scale, gives the command to withdraw. Now the legal nightmare begins. Logos 7 analyzes the time. Around midnight or 1 in the morning, by all laws of the civilized world, the arrested person should be placed in a holding cell until morning. Courts are not held at night. Investigative actions are not conducted at night, but the convoy leads him not to prison. They lead him to the high priest's house. This is a gross violation of procedural norms. System Logos 7 begins to record a list of legal errors, which by morning will turn into a long scroll of lawlessness. Why such a rush? Why drag him through the night city, risking waking the residents? Because they had a deadline. They needed to finish everything before the main mass of people and pilgrims woke up. They needed to present Jerusalem with a fait accompli. The false prophet is convicted. The matter is closed. Analysis of Operation Gethsemane is complete. The system's conclusions are unequivocal. First, it was not a spontaneous action, but a carefully planned military operation involving the state armed forces of Rome. Second, Judas Iscariot played the role of spotter, but the scenario didn't go as he possibly expected. Jesus surrendered without a fight. Third, Peter's aggression gave a formal pretext for the use of force, but was neutralized by the arrestee himself. Now that Jesus is in the hands of his enemies, we move to the next stage. The most unfair, fastest, and legally illiterate trial in history. In the next chapter, we will load the norms of Jewish law, Mishnah and Talmud, into Logos 7. We will conduct a virtual audit of the Sanhedrin session. The system has already detected 18 points on which this trial was illegitimate. 18 reasons why the verdict should have been annulled immediately. But it was carried out. Why did Lady Justice not just close her eyes that night, but gouge them out? If you think you know what a trial looks like, forget everything you've seen in modern TV shows. Forget about the presumption of innocence, lawyers in expensive suits, and impartial jurors. What happened in Jerusalem in the pre-dawn hours of that spring night, the analytical system Logos 7 refuses to classify as a trial. In our database, this incident is filed under the code name Judicial Murder. We proceed to the 4th chapter of our investigation. Jesus is arrested, bound. He is led through the night streets of the sleeping city, but led not to a police station, not to a prison, but to a private mansion in the upper city. There, behind high walls, the most influential people of the nation have already gathered. 71 people, the elite, the Sanhedrin. Official history claims this was a lawful tribunal that issued a just verdict to a blasphemer. But we are not here to retell official versions. We are here to uncover facts. We loaded the full text of the Mishnah, the code of oral laws of Judaism that regulated judicial proceedings in the 1st century, into Logos 7. Specifically the tractate Sanhedrin, which details the procedure for handling criminal cases involving the death penalty. Comparing the requirements of the law with the actual actions of the judges that night produces a shocking result. System Logos 7 identified 18 gross, fatal violations of the procedural code. Any, I emphasize, any of these violations individually should have led to the immediate annulment of the process and the release of the defendant. But there were 18. This was not a trial. It was a play where the ending was written before the curtain rose. Let's conduct a legal audit of this night. Point by point. Violation 1. Time. System Logos 7 points to a strict prohibition written in Jewish law. Trials for cases involving the death penalty, dinei nefashot, can only be conducted during daylight hours, from sunrise to sunset. Starting a trial at night is a crime. Ending a trial at night is a crime. Why did this rule exist? Ancient lawyers understood psychology. Night is the time of shadows, fears, and conspiracies. The mind of judges must be clear as sunlight. But Jesus is tried deep in the night. The haste was so great they couldn't wait for dawn. They needed to finish everything before the city woke up. Violation 2. Calendar. The trial took place on the eve of the Pesach holiday, or, by another chronology, on the first day of the holiday. The law categorically forbids holding court sessions on the Sabbath and on days of major holidays. Trial is work, and work is forbidden on a holiday. Moreover, passing a death sentence on the eve of a holiday is impossible because execution cannot be carried out on a holiday, and delaying the execution of the sentence was considered torture for the convict. They violated the sacred calendar of their own people to eliminate a competitor. Violation 3. Place. According to the law, the High Council, the Great Sanhedrin, has the right to issue death sentences in only one place in the universe, in the chamber of hewn stone, Lishkat Hagazit, on the temple grounds. A verdict issued in any other place has no legal force. Where was Jesus tried? In the house of High Priest Caiaphas? This is a private residence. Imagine the Supreme Court of a country gathering in the Chief Justice's kitchen to sentence someone to execution by firing squad. From the jurisprudential viewpoint of that time, this gathering was not a legitimate court session, but a private meeting of a gang of conspirators. Violation 4. Interrogation procedure. First, Jesus was brought to Annas. Annas is the former high priest, father-in-law of the ruling Caiaphas. Logos 7 characterizes Annas as the godfather of the Jerusalem mafia. He held no official post, but held all the strings of power and finance in his hands. Interrogation by Annas is complete nonsense. This is a preliminary investigation, which did not exist in Jewish law. The law forbade interrogating the accused alone. Judges were supposed to listen to witnesses, not beat a confession out of the defendant in a private conversation. Annas tried to force Jesus to incriminate himself, to tell about secret teachings and accomplices. Jesus, knowing the law perfectly, refused to answer, stating, "I spoke openly to the world. Ask those who heard me what I said to them." This was a brilliant legal move. He demanded adherence to procedure. First witnesses, then accusation. For this, he received the first blow to the face from a servant. And here we come to the most important part. Witnesses. In a Jewish court, there was no prosecutor. The accusation was built exclusively on witness testimony. A minimum of 2 witnesses were required, whose testimonies would match in minute detail. If they diverged in anything, color of clothes, time of day, phrasing, their testimony was annulled. Logos 7 analyzes the proceedings at Caiaphas's house. Evangelist Mark writes, "Many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. The system models chaos in the courtroom. They brought in shills, but apparently, in their haste, briefed them poorly. One said, 'He said, I will destroy the temple.' Another, 'He said, I can destroy the temple.' A third, 'He promised to build a new one in 3 days.' The difference in wording was critical. Absolute precision is needed for a death sentence. The case was falling apart before their eyes. The charge of terrorism, threat to the temple, wasn't sticking. Caiaphas was nervous. He understood he was losing control. Time was passing, dawn was coming, and they had no legitimate grounds for execution. Jesus remained silent. This silence was the loudest sound in the room. He didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses, didn't catch witnesses in lies. He just stood and watched. This infuriated the judges. And then Caiaphas goes all in. He commits the 5th, and perhaps most fatal violation of the law. He demands self-incrimination from the accused. In Jewish law, the principle operated, no one can be condemned on his own admission. A person could not testify against himself because it was believed that in a stressful situation, he might incriminate himself, seeking death as deliverance. Admission of guilt was not proof. But Caiaphas doesn't care about the law. He stands up and asks a direct question using a formula of adjuration. "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." It is a trap. If Jesus says no, he discredits himself before his disciples and ceases to be a threat, but remains alive as a liar. If he says yes, this can be interpreted as blasphemy. Jesus breaks silence. The answer he gives, System Logos 7, regards as the point of no return. He says, "You have said so," and adds a quote from the prophet Daniel. "Hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Dead silence falls in the hall. To understand why these words became a death sentence, one must immerse oneself in the context. Sitting at the right hand of power. Power is a euphemism for the name of God, which cannot be pronounced. To sit to the right of God means to claim divine status, equal power. For the monotheistic ear of a Jew, this sounded like an atomic bomb explosion. A man of flesh and blood declares that he is part of the deity. Caiaphas's reaction is instantaneous and theatrical. He tears his clothes. This is the 6th violation. The high priest is strictly forbidden to tear his sacred garments no matter what happens, even in sign of mourning. But Caiaphas does this intentionally. It is a visual signal to the other judges. "Look, I am horrified by what I heard." With this gesture, he pressures the jury. He shouts, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy." And here, the 7th violation occurs. Voting. The voting procedure in the Sanhedrin was strictly regulated. Polling had to start with the youngest members of the court so they wouldn't fear the authority of the elders. The high priest was supposed to vote last. Caiaphas imposes his opinion first, and the crowd obediently picks it up. He serves death. Speaking of unanimity, System Logos 7 found an amazing rule in the Talmud. If the Sanhedrin votes for the death penalty unanimously, without a single vote against, then such a verdict is annulled. It was believed that if none of the 71 judges found arguments in defense of the accused, then the court is biased, and the defense was not represented properly. That night, everyone voted for. Ironically, precisely their unanimity legally proved their criminal collusion. 8th violation, lack of defense. Jesus had no lawyer. No one spoke for him. The law required the court to seek exculpatory arguments with all its might. If the judges didn't find them themselves, they were obliged to invite someone from the public. But that night, defense was excluded from the script. 9th violation, the verdict. By law, an acquittal could be issued on the same day, but a guilty verdict only on the next. Judges were supposed to disperse, fast, think, double-check facts, and only gather again the next day for the final vote. This is a cooling-off period to avoid emotional decisions. In Jesus' case, the verdict was delivered instantly. Death. Immediately. And then began what Logos 7 qualifies as the loss of human semblance. Judges, respectable elders, the elite of the nation, began to beat a bound man, spit in his face, play a sadistic game, prophesy, "Who hit you?" They covered his face and beat him. This is the 10th violation. A judge who showed personal aggression toward the defendant is automatically disqualified. They ceased to be judges and became lynchers. At the same time, in the courtyard, another drama unfolded which our system links to events in the hall. Peter, the Rock, the main defender. He was the only one who could have testified for the defense. But psychological analysis shows the total disintegration of his personality that night. Cold, fear, pressure of a hostile environment. A servant girl recognizes him. He denies it. Again and again. Swears and vows he doesn't know. This man. The rooster crow at dawn became the final chord of this night. Peter is broken. Jesus is alone. There's no defense. The law is trampled. Let's summarize the chapter. The audit conducted by System Logos 7 is unambiguous. What happened in Caiaphas's house has nothing to do with justice. It was an elimination procedure masked as a trial. They violated time, place, interrogation procedure, rules of witness testimony, voting regulations, and even dress code. 18 violations. 18 nails in the coffin of the Jewish judicial system of that time. But there was one problem. A huge problem that hung over Caiaphas like the sword of Damocles. Despite the death sentence, the Sanhedrin was powerless. They didn't have the right to kill. The Roman Empire, having occupied Judea, stripped local courts of the jus gladi, the right of the sword. Only the Roman governor could execute. All this nocturnal farce was needed only for one thing: to formulate an accusation with which to go to Pilate. But here is the snag. Pilate absolutely doesn't care about Jewish blasphemies. If they come to him and say, "This man called himself the Son of God," Pilate will laugh in their face and say, "In Rome, our emperor is also a son of God. So what?" A religious charge is null and void for Rome. Caiaphas needed to reclassify the case. He needed, in a couple of hours while they walked from the high priest's palace to the praetorium, to turn a religious heretic into a dangerous political criminal. He needed to fabricate a case of high treason. How did they do it? How did they make the Roman wolf dance to their tune? And who is Pontius Pilate, really? A skeptic philosopher trying to save an innocent man, or a ruthless executioner who was simply haggling? In the next chapter, we will load the dossier on the 5th procurator of Judea into Logos 7. We will analyze his career, his fears, and his fatal mistake. Chapter 5. The Pilate Dilemma. The court moves to Roman territory, and there, the laws are completely different. Dawn over Jerusalem. A cold, piercing wind from the desert disperses the remnants of the night mist. The city wakes up, not yet knowing that on this day its cobblestones will be stained with blood that will be spoken of for millennia. We continue our investigation. System Logos 7 has completed the analysis of the nocturnal lawlessness in Caiaphas's house, and now shifts focus to another point on the city map. We move from the cramped, stuffy halls of the religious court to the spacious, marble-clad atrium of Roman power, to the praetorium. Most likely this was Herod's palace, which Roman governors used as their residence during visits to Jerusalem. Here it smells not of incense and sacrificial animals, but of expensive leather, polished metal, and imperial order. Here begins the 5th chapter of our case, the Pilate Dilemma. Who is Pontius Pilate? Culture, literature, and cinema have painted for us an image of a tired philosopher, an intellectual in a toga who suffers from migraines, hates the heat, and tries to save a wandering preacher from evil priests. Mikhail Bulgakov created a brilliant image, but unfortunately, historically inaccurate. We loaded into Logos 7 all available historical evidence about the real Pontius Pilate. Texts by Philo of Alexandria, Josephus Flavius, found inscriptions, and coins of that era. The psychological profile that our system produces is frightening. The real Pilate is not a soft-hearted liberal. He is a tough, cynical, and at times unjustifiably cruel administrator. He is a military man, an equestrian, a man who made a career in the very snake pit of Roman politics. Philo describes his rule as a chain of bribery, violence, robbery, mistreatment, insults, continuous executions without trial and purpose. Once, to suppress a protest against using temple money to build an aqueduct, he dressed his soldiers in civilian clothes, infiltrated them into the crowd, and on a signal, staged a massacre with clubs. Hundreds dead. That is whom Jesus actually met. Why then do the Gospels depict him hesitating? Logos 7 offers an answer. This is not humanism. This is politics. Pilate hated the Jewish leadership. He despised the Sanhedrin. For him, the high priests were annoying native chieftains who constantly wrote denunciations against him to Rome. And when they dragged Jesus to him, Pilate's first reaction was reflexive. If these people want to kill someone, it means this someone is possibly useful to Rome, or at least he can be used to spite Caiaphas. Let's analyze the prisoner transfer scene. It is the height of hypocrisy. The priests bring Jesus to the gates of the praetorium, but do not enter themselves. Evangelist John explains, so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. In the house of a Gentile, Pilate, there is leaven, and entering there would make them ritually unclean. Imagine the absurdity of the situation highlighted by Logos 7. People who just fabricated a death sentence, violated 18 laws, and are preparing the murder of an innocent man are afraid to enter a room where there might be breadcrumbs. They stand on the street, preserving holiness, while their hands are bloody to the elbows. Pilate is forced to come out to them. He becomes a shuttle, coursing between the Jewish street and the Roman office, between the world of religious fanaticism and the world of imperial law. Pilate's first question, what accusation do you bring against this man? He is a professional. He needs a legal basis. And here, a substitution occurs, which our system qualifies as a key moment of falsification. At night, in the Sanhedrin, Jesus was tried for blasphemy. But the priests understand. For Rome, this is not a crime. So they change the charge on the fly. Logos 7 records 3 points of the new indictment voiced by the accusers. First, he corrupts our nation. A vague article, disturbing public order. Second, he forbids paying tribute to Caesar. A direct lie. The system cross-references this with the database of Jesus' statements. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. This is slander, and the accusers know it. Third, he calls himself Christ a king. Article Lex Julia Lisae Majestatis. Law on lèse majesté is treason. Here it is. The third point is a death sentence. In the Roman Empire, there's only one king, Emperor Tiberius. Anyone who calls himself a king without the Senate's sanction is a rebel, usurper, and enemy of the state. This is no longer religion. This is high politics. Pilate is obliged to react. He leads Jesus inside, away from the crowd's screams. The interrogation begins, one-on-one. The most powerful man in the province against the most powerless. Logos 7 analyzes the dialogue. Pilate asks directly, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Note the intonation of the question. He sees before him a beaten, bound carpenter, without an army, without a retinue, without weapons. In the eyes of a Roman officer, kings don't look like this. It sounds more like sarcasm. "You? A king? Seriously?" Jesus answers, and his answer disrupts Pilate's program. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't attack. He moves the conversation to another plane. My kingdom is not of this world. Semantic analysis system shows, for Pilate, this is a marker phrase. It means safe. If his kingdom is not of this world, it means he doesn't claim the throne in Jerusalem. It means he doesn't intend to seize fortresses and cut legion supply lines. He is a philosopher, a crazy dreamer. Anyone, but not a political competitor to Tiberius. Pilate, being a pragmatist, instantly loses interest in the accusation. He understands. There is no case. The corpus delicti is missing. "I find no fault in this man," he announces to the crowd. This should have been the end. Roman justice had spoken, but the crowd doesn't disperse. The priests begin to press. They engage blackmail mode. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Here Pilate hears the word Galilee and tries to get rid of responsibility. It is a typical bureaucratic maneuver, Toss the hot potato to someone else's jurisdiction. Herod Antipas rules Galilee. Herod happens to be in the city. Send him to Herod, let him deal with it. We will talk about this in the next chapter, but spoiling ahead, the trick didn't work. Jesus returned, and here we are, back in the praetorium. Pilate is furious. He failed to dump the case. He has to decide. Logos 7 models the procurator's options. He has legions. He can disperse the crowd by force. He has done it before. Why not now? Because now is Pesach. There are 200,000 pilgrims in the city. The situation is explosive. The slightest spark, and an uprising will begin that will take months to drown in blood. Tiberius in Rome won't pat him on the head for that. Pilate tries to bargain. He offers a compromise. A terrible, bloody compromise. I will punish him and release him. Punish, in the language of Roman law, meant scourging. But not just a whipping. It was flagrum, flogging with a whip embedded with lead weights and sharp bones. Logos 7 conducts a forensic reconstruction. Such punishment in itself often led to death. It was a semi-execution. Pilate counted on a psychological effect. He wanted to turn the king into a bloody mess, bring him out to the crowd and say, "Look, is this your king? Is this pitiful, crushed body a threat to Rome? Are you laughing?" The famous exe homo. Behold the man. It was an attempt to evoke pity through disgust, an attempt to satisfy the crowd's bloodlust with little blood. But the sociological modeling system shows the crowd, heated by the priest's provocateurs, has already passed the point of no return. They didn't need blood. They needed death. The sight of the tormented Jesus didn't evoke pity. It evoked a surge of aggression, like the smell of blood to sharks. And then the high priests lay their last, strongest trump card on the table, an argument against which Pilate has no defense. They shout, "If you release him, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." System Logos 7 notes, this is not just a shout. This is a direct threat of political denunciation. The title, Amicus Caesaris, friend of Caesar, is an official status, a rank in the imperial hierarchy. Losing it meant the end of a career, exile, and often death. Context is crucial. The year 33. Emperor Tiberius is old, suspicious, and paranoid. He lives on Capri, and any rumor of conspiracy leads to executions. Just recently in Rome, the conspiracy of Sejanus, the powerful Praetorian prefect Pilate's patron, was uncovered. Pilate is now under threat. His position in Rome is shaky. Any complaint that he is covering for rebels will be viewed through the prism of his connection to the disgraced Sejanus. The priests hit the sorest spot. They are effectively saying, either you kill him, or we write to Rome that you support a usurper. Logos 7 calculates probabilities in Pilate's head. Option A, save an innocent Galilean. Cost, riot in Jerusalem, denunciation to the emperor, 100% probability of dismissal and trial, possibly Pilate's own execution. Option B, execute an innocent man. Cost, death of one person, calm in the province for the holidays, retention of office, good relations with the local elite. From the point of view of utilitarian ethics and Roman administrative cynicism, the choice is obvious. The life of one provincial is not worth the career of a Roman prefect. Truth? Justice? What is truth? He throws the famous phrase. For Pilate, truth is what allows one to survive. But before passing the sentence, he performs a ritual that baffles historians, but which Logos 7 explains as an act of deepest despair and contempt. He washes his hands. Note, this is not a Roman custom. In Roman law, there is no procedure for washing away guilt with water. This is a Jewish custom. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, a ritual is described. If a corpse is found in a field and the killer is unknown, the elders of the city must wash their hands over the victim and say, "Our hands did not shed this blood." Pilate, a pagan, uses a Jewish religious rite in the face of a Jewish crowd. This is not just a gesture of, "I am not guilty." This is a vicious, biting satire. He is essentially saying to them, "You, fanatics of your laws, I use your own ritual to show you who the real murderer is here. I am clean by your own rules. His blood is on you." And the crowd answers with a terrible phrase that will echo through the ages. "His blood be on us and on our children." They accept the terms of the deal. Logos 7 delivers a verdict on the 5th chapter. Pilate was not a victim of circumstance. He was an accomplice. He knew Jesus was innocent. The system unambiguously classifies his actions as criminal negligence and abuse of power for personal gain. He sold justice for political stability. He didn't want this death, but he allowed it because the alternative was personally too expensive for him. Pilate's dilemma was resolved. The order is given. Ibis ad crucem, you will go to the cross. The Roman state machine, grinding its gears, accepted the victim prepared by the Jewish priests. But in this story, there was another player to whom Pilate tried to send Jesus to absolve himself of responsibility. The one Jesus called that fox, Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee, killer of John the Baptist. Why did Jesus, who spoke to Pilate, not say a single word to Herod? Why did this meeting end in a jester's outfit? And how did this affect the legal status of the case? In the next chapter, we will analyze the Herod factor, a system of jurisdictional games where a living person became just a ball in the ping-pong of two tyrants. In any complex bureaucratic system, be it a modern corporation or the Roman Empire of the 1st century, a universal rule exists. If you don't want to make a difficult decision, delegate it. Pass the buck. Make someone else sign the death warrant. Pontius Pilate, cornered by the high priest's blackmail, finds what seems to him a brilliant legal loophole. Hearing that the accused is from Galilee, he remembers the rules of jurisdiction. Welcome to the 6th chapter of our investigation. We call it the Herod factor. This is the strangest, most grotesque, and psychologically complex episode of the entire process. An episode where tragedy momentarily turns into farce, and silence becomes louder than a scream. System Logos 7 tracks the movement of the object. Jesus, already beaten but not yet sentenced to death, is led out of the Roman praetorium. The convoy leads him through the narrow streets of Jerusalem to the Hasmonean palace. Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, who arrived in the capital for the holiday, is staying there. Let's load the dossier on this man into our analytical system. Who is Herod Antipas? Do not confuse him with Herod the Great, his father, who built the temple and, according to tradition, killed infants in Bethlehem. Antipas is a pale shadow of his father. If Herod the Great was a lion, cruel but a powerful statesman, then Antipas was who? Jesus once gave him a characterization that Logos 7 considers sniper accurate. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, verse 32, Jesus calls Herod a fox. In Greek, allopex. Our linguistic subsystem, having analyzed the semantics of this word in 1st century culture, produces an interesting result. Unlike European folklore, where the fox is a symbol of cleverness and cunning, in Eastern and antique tradition, the fox is a second-rate animal. It is a scavenger. It is one who is cunning, but cowardly. One who cannot hunt like a lion and is forced to steal scraps. The fox is a symbol of destructive but petty, mean power. Calling the ruler a fox, Jesus denied him royal greatness. He called him a petty political crook, and so they meet face to face, the fox and the lamb. For Herod, this visit is an unexpected gift. Logos 7 models the Tetrarch's emotional state. Evangelist Luke writes, Herod, seeing Jesus, was very glad. What was he glad about? That justice would be served? No, for he had desired for a long time to see him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Think about the cynicism of the situation. For Herod, Jesus is not the Messiah, not a prophet, and not even a dangerous criminal. For him, he is a traveling magician, a celebrity. Herod is a rich, satiated, bored, Hellenized monarch. He has everything except entertainment. He wants a private show. Turn water into wine. Heal someone. Do a trick. But behind this idle curiosity lies a deep, sticky fear. Herod's psychological profile, compiled by System Logos 7, reveals severe trauma of conscience. Not long ago, Herod committed a murder that haunts him. He executed John the Baptist. Moreover, executed him stupidly, while drunk, succumbing to the manipulation of the dancer Salome and his wife Herodias. When rumors of Jesus' miracles began to spread, Herod panicked, saying, "It is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead." Now he looks at Jesus and tries to understand, is this the ghost of his victim, or a new player? The interrogation begins. Herod asks questions, many questions. He flatters, threatens, begs for a miracle. The chief priests stand around furiously accusing the prisoner, trying to turn the Tetrarch against him. Noise, din, pressure. And here happens what our system registers as a unique anomaly. Jesus is silent. He spoke to Annas. He argued with Caiaphas. He held a philosophical conversation with Pilate. But he does not answer a single word to Herod. Absolute ignore? 0 bytes of information? Why? Logos 7 analyzes the defendant's behavioral strategy. This is not just the defense tactic of not testifying against oneself. It is a moral verdict. Jesus considers Herod dead, spiritually dead. With Pilate, a pagan and killer, one can still talk about truth because Pilate is a man of the system. He performs a function. But Herod is a man who knew the truth. He listened to John the Baptist with pleasure, as chronicles say, but killed it for a whim. There's nothing to talk about with a fox. Herod crossed the line beyond which dialogue is impossible. This silence is the loudest insult one can inflict on an Eastern despot. Herod feels this humiliation. His show failed. No miracle. The magician doesn't work. The prisoner looks right through him, as if through empty space. This hits a narcissist's ego harder than any insolence. And then Herod decides to take revenge. But not by execution. He is too cunning to take on the blood of another prophet. John's ghost already keeps him awake. He chooses the weapon of the weak, mockery. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe. Let's stop at this detail. Gorgeous robe. The Greek word lampros means shining, brilliant, white. In Roman tradition, a white toga, toga candida, was worn by candidates for office, hence the word candidate. But in the context of the Jewish East, it had a different meaning. It is a jester's outfit. Herod stages a carnival. You call yourself a king? Great. Here is a royal mantle for you. Most likely it was some old, perhaps theatrical cape from palace props. With this gesture, Herod delivers his verdict. And this verdict, oddly enough, is an acquittal. But it is acquittal through humiliation. Dressing Jesus as a jester, Herod sends a signal to Pilate. This man is not dangerous. He is not a king. He is crazy, a blissful fool. Roman legions have nothing to fear from a clown. Logos 7 conducts a legal analysis of this action. Herod, ruler of Galilee, refused to judge his subject. He found no corpus delicti, no elements of a crime deserving death. Technically, This should have meant the end of the process. If neither the Roman procurator nor the local king finds guilt, the accused must be released. Jesus is returned to Pilate with an unspoken resolution. Not guilty, harmless, mentally unstable. But this visit had another result, purely political. Logos 7 draws attention to the gospel phrase, "That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other." Here it is, the cynical magic of power. What united them? Jesus. Pilate made a beautiful diplomatic gesture, acknowledged Herod's sovereignty by sending him the prisoner. "I respect your authority over Galileans." Herod appreciated the gesture and returned the favor by not passing a verdict and returning the prisoner to Pilate, thereby acknowledging Rome's supremacy. You are the boss, you decide. Two predators, the Roman wolf and the Galilean fox, who hated each other for years, found common ground. They played football with a living human, and this game strengthened their political alliance. The victim became the cement for their friendship. System Logos 7 notes this as a typical behavioral pattern of elites. The solidarity of executioners is always stronger than their differences when it comes to eliminating a threat to the system. So Jesus is in the praetorium again. The circle has closed. Pilate's maneuver of shifting responsibility failed. The hot potato returned to his hands, and now it has become even hotter. Time is ticking. The sun rises higher. The crowd at the palace grows. Herod, with his farce, unwittingly worsened the situation. Now Jesus looks not just like a criminal, but like a laughingstock in a white robe. This lowers the crowd's empathy threshold. The king has already mocked him, so he isn't scary. He can be trampled. Pilate understands. He will have to make the decision himself. He has one last chance to save the situation without resorting to execution. In his arsenal is the ancient custom of Passover amnesty. One prisoner can be released to freedom by the will of the people. Pilate is sure the people will choose Jesus. After all, quite recently they greeted him with palm branches. He sets up an alternative. On one side, a harmless philosopher whom the authorities simply bullied. On the other, a real, proven murderer, terrorist, and thug. Barabbas. Pilate thinks this is a win-win lottery. He thinks he is manipulating the crowd. But Logos 7, having conducted sociological modeling, sees what the Roman prefect did not see. Pilate makes a fatal mistake. He underestimates the mass management technologies already launched by the high priests. In the next chapter, we will break down the crowd algorithm. We will answer the question that plagues historians. How could the same people who shouted Hosanna on Sunday shout Crucify on Friday? Were they the same people? Or are we dealing with a brilliant but monstrous political technology of substituting public opinion? System Logos 7 is ready to expose the anatomy of collective madness. Stay with us. The investigation enters its loudest phase: sound. The most terrifying weapon of mass destruction is sound. Not an explosion, not the whistle of an arrow, but a low-frequency, rhythmic hum growing into a roar. The roar of a human crowd demanding blood. If we could digitize the acoustic imprint of that morning in Jerusalem, we would see a sound wave on the monitors of such intensity capable of breaking the will of even seasoned legionnaires. We move to the 7th chapter of our investigation. Algorithm crowd. This is perhaps the most important sociological lesson history has taught humanity. To this day, theologians and historians break spears over the question: how is this possible? How could the very same people who just 5 days ago, on Palm Sunday, spread their clothes under Jesus' feet and shouted, Hosanna! Now, on Friday morning, with faces twisted in hatred, scream, Crucify him! What is this? The phenomenal fickleness of human nature? Collective bipolar disorder? Or are we dealing with something else? We loaded data on the demographics of Jerusalem in the year 30, the topography of the area before the Praetorium, and mass consciousness management algorithms into the analytical system Logos 7. The modeling results refute the popular myth of the fickle crowd. The system claims, these were not the same people. Let's conduct a demographic cross-section. On Sunday, Jesus was met by pilgrims, mostly Galileans, his countrymen, simple people, peasants, fishermen, who came for the holiday and sincerely believed that this prophet from Nazareth would finally drive out the Romans. Galileans are hot, passionate people who hate the Jerusalem elite. And who stood at Pilate's palace on Friday morning? Logos 7 analyzes the time factor. The trial before Pilate happens early in the morning, roughly between 6 and 8 o'clock. Where are the Galilean pilgrims at this time? They are sleeping. They are camping in tent camps on the Mount of Olives, outside the city walls. They have no smartphones, no news feeds. They simply do not know that their teacher is arrested. The operation was conducted at night specifically to cut off the support group. So who filled the square in front of the judge's platform? The system models the social composition of the crowd. These are residents of Jerusalem. And not just residents, but a specific sampling. Jerusalem is a city whose economy depended 100% on the temple. Souvenir sellers, money changers, wood and livestock suppliers, artisans, service staff, families of Levites and guards. This is a huge army of people whose welfare directly depended on the high priests. This is the clientele, dependent people bound by patronage relationships. Jesus, who staged a pogrom in the temple and overturned the money changers' tables, was not a messiah to these people. He was a threat to their wallet. He was a radical who wanted to destroy their stable business. Logos 7 identifies the presence of an organized core in this crowd. We call them claqueurs. In ancient theater, there were hired groups who applauded or booed actors for money. The high priests used this technology virtuously. Provocateurs were infiltrated into the crowd. Temple servants, junior priests in civilian clothes. Their task was simple: set the tone. Acoustic modeling shows how this mechanism works. In the noise of a crowd, an individual voice gets lost. But if 10 people at different points of the square synchronously start chanting a slogan, within 30 seconds, 100 people pick it up. Within a minute, the whole square. This is the resonance effect. People who don't even understand the essence of the matter start shouting just for company, obeying the herd instinct. The phrase, "crucify him," could not be born spontaneously. Crucifixion is a Roman execution, alien to Jewish tradition. Jews stoned people. If the crowd acted spontaneously, they would shout, "Stone him." But they demanded specifically Roman execution. Why? Because this slogan was sent down from above. The instructors in the crowd knew what to shout to force Pilate to act. Now back to Pilate. He comes out onto the balcony, or onto the pavement called lithostrotos, and tries to hold, as he thinks, a democratic vote. The custom of amnesty. He offers a choice: Jesus the Nazarene, a wandering philosopher, or Jesus Barabbas, a convicted murderer and rebel. Pilate is confident in the victory of common sense. Who in their right mind would choose a killer over a healer? But Pilate makes a mistake often made by politicians detached from the people. He doesn't understand the archetype of the hero the crowd needs at this historical moment. Logos 7 analyzes society's demand for violence. Judea is humiliated by occupation. The people thirst for revenge. Jesus of Nazareth suggests turning the other cheek. He talks about loving enemies. And now he stands beaten, in jester's clothes, bound, silent. In the eyes of a brutal street crowd, he looks weak. A loser. And who is Barabbas? We will analyze him in detail in the next chapter. But for the crowd, he is a man of action. He killed Romans. He didn't chat about the kingdom of heaven. He slit occupiers' throats here and now. For the angry townspeople, he is one of them. He is a tough guy, who risked his life for freedom. The psychological module of system Logos 7 explains the phenomenon of choice. The crowd always chooses strength. In a state of affect, fear, and aggression, primitive instincts take over. Jesus, who is silent and doesn't resist, causes irritation in the crowd. If you are the Son of God, save yourself. And if you can't, then what kind of God are you? Barabbas is understandable. His violence is understandable. And so the manipulation begins. Pilate asks, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" At first, scattered shouts are heard. Agents of the high priests, positioned at key points, the system calls these crystallization nodes of opinion, begin to chant the name, Barabbas. The syllables are convenient, rhythmic. The crowd picks it up. Pilate is at a loss. What then shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? And here sounds the terrible answer, let him be crucified. Logos 7 records a critical boiling point. Pilate tries to argue. He appeals to logic. Why? What evil has he done? But one cannot argue with a crowd using logic. A crowd is not a sum of intellects. It is an arithmetic mean of emotions, and the basest ones at that. With every question from Pilate, the degree of aggression rises. They shout even louder. Pilate sees that a riot is starting. Evangelist Matthew uses a precise term, tumult. This is a harbinger of a pogrom. If he doesn't give them a victim now, they will tear apart the praetorium. And he gives in. But before that, another episode occurs, which our system highlights as an act of collective oath on blood. Pilate washes his hands, as we discussed earlier, and says, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person." And all the people, again, not all the people of Israel, but the specific crowd on the square, answer, "His blood be on us and on our children." For many centuries, this phrase was used to justify anti-Semitism. But Logos 7, analyzing the context, sees here not a curse on a nation, but a legal formula. In ancient law, to remove responsibility from a judge, the accusers had to take responsibility for a possible judicial error upon themselves. The crowd was so pumped up with propaganda, so confident in their rightness, or so eager to end the spectacle, that they easily signed this terrible contract. Come on, execute him. We take the sin on ourselves. Just finish it quicker. It was a moment of total de-individuation. No one individually would have killed Jesus, but the crowd, as a single organism, did it with ease. Responsibility blurred. Everyone shouted, so I shouted. System Logos 7 summarizes the 7th chapter. We proved that. First, the popular vote was a fiction. The square was filled with a specially selected audience loyal to the priests. Supporters of Jesus were physically cut off by distance and ignorance. Second, the technology of claqueurs, professional provocateurs controlling the vector of the crowd's aggression, was used. Third, the crowd's choice was predetermined by psychology. They chose understandable evil, Barabbas, over incomprehensible good, Jesus. The weakness Jesus demonstrated by his humility was unbearable for people craving strength. The algorithm worked flawlessly. The high priests pulled off a brilliant political technology operation. With the hands of the Roman governor and the throat of the Jerusalem rebel, they eliminated their enemy, remaining formally clean. But in this scheme, there is one figure who usually remains in the shadows. The figure who gained the most from this trial. A man who should have died that day, but miraculously walked free. Barabbas. Who is he? The Gospels sparingly call him a robber. But Logos 7, correlating facts from Roman chronicles and linguistic data, reveals a striking picture. His name is the key. Bar Abba, son of the Father. In the next chapter, we will analyze the Barabbas scenario. We will prove that his release was not an accident. Why was it more profitable for the system to leave a murderer alive than a philosopher? And what strange, almost mystical symmetry connects Jesus Christ and Jesus Barabbas. Prepare yourselves. In the next chapter, we will look into the face of the man who became the only one in history who was literally saved by the death of Christ. He watched Jesus being led to his cross. What was he thinking at that moment? In any complex system, be it quantum mechanics or political history, there exist so-called strange attractors, points to which events are drawn contrary to obvious logic. In the case of the murder of Jesus of Nazareth, such a point, such a black hole warping the space of justice, became a man about whom we know criminally little. A man who walked free from death row a minute before the executioners were supposed to enter. We proceed to the 8th chapter of our investigation. Scenario Barabbas. Official church tradition often pushes this figure to the background, making him just an extra necessary for a plot twist. But analytical system Logos 7, having processed data from judicial protocols and probabilistic models, asserts Barabbas is not just a random bandit. He is a mirror reflection of Jesus. He is his dark double. And what happened on the Lithostrotos, the stone pavement before Pilate's palace, is not just a crowd's choice. It was a collision of two concepts of saving the world. Let's start with identification. Who sat in the Roman dungeon that morning? The Gospels call him a robber, Greek word lestis. But Logos 7, analyzing the use of this term in first-century documents, introduces a significant correction. Romans called robbers anyone who opposed their power with arms in hand. Josephus Flavius calls the Zealots, radical fighters for independence, by this name. Barabbas was not a pickpocket or a highway robber. Evangelist Mark gives a clear qualification. He was connected with insurrectionists and committed murder during the insurrection. The word stasis, insurrection, means an armed uprising. Barabbas is a field commander, a terrorist, a partisan. Call him what you like, depending on your political orientation. He killed Roman soldiers. He was a hero of the resistance. He had blood on his hands up to the elbows. But for a certain part of the population, it was the right blood. And now, a detail that sends a chill down the spine. We asked Logos 7 to conduct a textual analysis of the oldest manuscripts of the Gospel of Matthew, specifically the Codex Coridethi and Syriac translations. The system discovered the full name of this man, which later scribes likely removed for pious reasons to avoid confusion. His name was Jesus Barabbas. The name Yeshua was very common at that time. But look at the surname, Bar Abba. In Aramaic, this means son of the Father. Imagine this scene. Two men stand on the balcony. On the right, Jesus of Nazareth, the one who calls himself the Son of the Heavenly Father. On the left, Jesus Barabbas, the one whose name literally translates as Son of the Father. Two Jesuses, two sons of the Father. One offers a kingdom not of this world, love and forgiveness. The other offers a kingdom here and now, won by dagger and fire. One resurrects the dead. The other makes the living dead. Pilate, without knowing it, staged not just a vote. He staged a theological and political referendum. Which Jesus do you want? And the people, incited by the elites, made their choice. Why? Why does system Logos 7 assert that releasing Barabbas was logical and profitable for all power structures despite his danger? Let's break down the logic of the high priests. Seemingly, Barabbas is dangerous for them. He is a radical. He provokes Rome. Troops might be brought in because of him. But Jesus of Nazareth is dangerous 1,000 times over. Why? Because Barabbas plays by understandable rules. He fights the system with its own methods. Violence. Violence is a currency elites know how to convert. One can negotiate with a rebel, buy him off, or, in extreme cases, kill him, and the movement will die with him. Jesus, however, encroached on the very basis of their power. He devalued the temple, saying one can worship God in spirit and truth anywhere. He undermined the authority of law interpreters. He was a systemic threat, a virus rewriting the code of Judaism. Barabbas was just a bug in the program. A bug can be tolerated. A virus must be destroyed. It is more profitable for elites to have an understandable killer by their side than an incomprehensible saint. Now, the logic of the crowd, which we already touched upon, but here we deepen the analysis through the prism of Barabbas's personality. Logos 7 models the collective unconscious. The crowd wants the miracle of liberation from Rome. Jesus the Nazarene deceived their expectations. He didn't summon legions of angels. He allowed himself to be bound. He is weak. Barabbas is the sublimation of their aggression. When they shout, "Barabbas," they are effectively shouting, "We want to kill Romans. We want revenge." By choosing Barabbas, they vote for the continuation of the war. It was a choice of path, the way of the sword versus the way of the cross. And now the most interesting part, the horizontal beam weighing about 40 kilograms. The vertical posts are already dug in at the place of execution. The system records physical collapse. His body is failing. The Romans, afraid the victim will die prematurely and spoil the spectacle, force Simon of Cyrene to carry the beam. This is not an act of mercy. This is the pragmatism of executioners. Golgotha, the bald skull of a hill outside the city walls. Here begins the engineering part of the execution. Nails. Artists paint them in the palms. Logos 7 refutes this. Palm tissues won't withstand the body weight. They will simply tear. The nails, square forged spikes 15 centimeters long, were driven into the wrists, into destote space, where the bones form a lock. This securely holds the body. But the median nerve passes right there. Damage to this nerve causes pain that is impossible to describe in human language. Doctors call it causalgia. It's as if your veins were filled with liquid fire. But the most terrible discovery of system Logos 7 concerns the mechanism of death. What does a crucified person die from? Not from blood loss, not from pain. He dies from asphyxiation. The pose on the cross is anatomically unnatural. Arms are stretched up and to the sides. In this position, the chest is in a state of maximum inhalation. It is easy to inhale, but to exhale, one must tense the diaphragm and abdominal muscles. But they don't work because the body is hanging. To exhale, Jesus had to push up on his pierced feet and pull up on his pierced hands. Every breath is a pull-up on nails. Pain in feet. Inhale. Pain in torn arm nerves. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Up. Down. Logos 7 calculates the frequency. At first, it is 10-12 times a minute. After an hour, muscles begin to cramp. Movement becomes harder and harder. Less oxygen comes in. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood, poisoning the brain. This is called hypercapnia. Jesus died quickly, in just 3 or 4 hours. Usually the crucified hung for days until they died of dehydration or until birds began to peck them alive. Why so fast? The system analyzes the medical phenomenon of bloody sweat in the Garden of Gethsemane and execution data. Conclusion: ruptured heart. Literally. Against the background of monstrous stress, blood thickening, and physical exertion, a rupture of the heart muscle or aorta occurred. The spear thrust delivered by a Roman soldier to ensure death confirms this. Blood and water flowed from the wound. Logos 7 interprets this as the separation of blood into fractions, clots and serum, in the pericardial sac, which happens with cardiac tamponade. He didn't die from the spear. He died because his heart couldn't withstand the weight of the world, or in medical terms, from a combination of traumatic shock and acute heart failure. We have reached the end of our investigation. Case closed. Evidence collected. Witnesses questioned. Body examined. One question remains, for the sake of which we launched system Logos 7. Who is the murderer? Who bears the main responsibility for the death of Jesus of Nazareth in April of the year 33? We load all variables into the final synthesis algorithm. We have suspects. Let's consider their guilt in percentage of probability and degree of responsibility. Suspect number 1, Judas Iscariot. Role, tool. He started the process but lost control over it. His guilt is betrayal of trust, but he didn't pass the sentence. He was only the detonator. Degree of guilt, 10%. Suspect number 2, Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Role, clients. They fabricated the case. They violated 18 laws. They manipulated the crowd. Their motive was preservation of power and money. They acted consciously and cold-bloodedly. This is premeditated murder. Degree of guilt, 40%. Suspect number 3, Pontius Pilate. Role, executor. He had the power to stop it. He knew the defendant was innocent, but he chose career over justice. His crime is cowardice and negligence. He washed his hands with water, but history didn't give him a towel. Degree of guilt, 30%. Suspect number 4, the crowd. Role, weapon. People who allowed themselves to be deceived. People who chose Barabbas. Collective irresponsibility. Degree of guilt, 20%. It seems everything is clear. It is a collective crime. Collusion of elites multiplied by the cowardice of an official and the stupidity of a crowd. But System Logos 7 suddenly issues an error. Analysis not complete. There is one more factor. One more participant whose actions do not fit the logic of a victim. Jesus himself. Look at the timeline of events. At every key moment he had a choice. He could have not gone to Jerusalem knowing they were looking for him. But he went. He could have not staged a pogrom in the temple, provoking the priests. But he did. He could have run from the Garden of Gethsemane when he saw torches, but he came out to meet them. He could have defended himself at the trial, shattered the accusation, called witnesses. He was a brilliant orator, but he was silent. He could have justified himself before Pilate, saying, "I am not a king, I just teach love." But he speaks of truth, provoking the procurator. Logos 7 makes a paradoxical, yet the only correct conclusion. This was not just a murder, it was suicide? No. It was a planned special operation of self-sacrifice. Jesus was not a victim of circumstances. He was the director of this drama. He knew the rules of the game of this cruel system. Roman, Jewish, human. He knew the system does not tolerate truth. And he intentionally entered the gears of this machine to break it with his blood. Who killed Jesus? We all did. Human nature, fear, greed, envy, indifference. But the final verdict of System Logos 7 sounds different. No one took his life. He gave it himself. The case, Jesus of Nazareth, moves from the archive of forensics to the archive of eternity. The investigation is over. Draw your own conclusions.